Welcome to Purposely Catholic. This program is a critical part of how we assist parents with children in living up to their call to be the primary catechists and teachers of the faith in their homes. Over the course of our time together, we'll hear from Father Len McMillan as we discuss matters of the faith central to every Catholic family. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, my name is Father Len McMillan. I am the pastor of St. Pius Parish here in Coeur d'Alene, and this is our third installment for Purposely Catholic on teaching your children, and the subject today is on consciousness, and so I brought an expert in on children's consciousness. This is Sue Styren, our principal at Holy Family Catholic School. Welcome, Sue, for joining us here at Purposely Catholic.
Thank you for having me today, Father.
Well, I need you because I can talk theology or conscience, but I don't know how to apply it to children. I know nothing about children and babies or what works. So I always
They're
like a parent.
mystery. Yeah, they are a mystery.
I say scream a lot. But the subject is consciousness in this chapter that you want to teach your kids. And so first, what is consciousness? And I like the definition of Cardinal Newman, who said, consciousness is the voice of God talking to me. Love that. But then he went on to add, and this is the part people forget, he went on to talk about the need to inform your conscience and strengthen and develop your conscience. Otherwise, it may just be the voice of the flesh talking to us. So one's consciousness is not just one's feelings. That's, I think, a problem of the modern world. And if I was a parent, a parent is in charge of developing their kid's consciousness. So, everybody should spend time in prayer and self-examination, developing their consciousness. So one's conscience is preoccupied with what God wants, not what I want. And that's the really hard part. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and I do like this, they had this lack of fear of God. You'll have commentaries say that. It doesn't mean being afraid in the sense of terror. It means fear that, it really means awe, but it also means this fear that I won't be concerned about God. The fear of the Lord means this fear that I'm indifferent to God. I think that's very dangerous. This guy, actually, this guy was going to get married. And anyhow, his spouse said, well, you're in charge of the animals. And if I want to go on vacation, I'm going to go on vacation, whether you want to or not. And he said, well, what do you think about that? And I said, well, I have to be honest. If her idea of marriage is you take care of the dogs, you take care of, and I'll go and do whatever I want, whenever I want. She had no fear about the loss of the relationship. That would concern me.
Yeah.
So
I have to agree, Father. That whole business about translating fear of God as if I'm afraid of God is an important concept to understand. And I think that because it is mentioned quite a bit in our liturgy, that children need to really understand that fear is more awe, and it's more a desire to draw near.
Right, and it's a fear that I don't want to lose this relationship.
Exactly.
It's so important. I'll do anything for it.
Exactly, and children do need to be trained in how to understand that it is not all about me. Anybody that has dealt with a 2-year-old knows that that conscience hasn't been developed yet, because it is all about me for a 2-year-old. And they need to realize that their actions have consequences, that what they do will draw them nearer to God or further away.
Can I push back on that?
Absolutely.
Because I'd say a 2-year-old does have a conscience. It's just not a developed conscience.
Correct.
Because they've done studies that if you have a little toy with a toddler and that toy is mean to other toys, children won't play with it, which means they have a preset moral conscience that, no, kindness and love matters. I don't want to be around mean things. I'd say a 2-year-old can be incredibly selfish. I mean, really, what has any 2-year-old ever done for me? But
They're
anyhow.
soft and cuddly.
But like, you have to teach them to develop their conscience. So parents, that's really important. And like, I love that definition of that consciousness is a voice of God talking to us. But you have to learn how to listen to that voice with a lot of self-examination and prayer. And so one example would be St. Patrick. St. Patrick, little story about St. Patrick. His grandfather was a priest, that time priest married. His father was a deacon. But as a teenager, he wanted nothing to do with religion. Strange teenager. So he's on the beach playing with his friends, and Celtic pirates come and capture them and sell them into slavery. So he spends his time as a slave in Ireland. And then he starts to remember all his religious teaching. And he's in the cold taking care of the sheep, and he starts to pray hundreds of prayers. Day and night, he'd pray hundreds and hundreds of prayers. Anyhow, the point being is that eventually, with all that prayer, he could hear the voice of God. And one day, the voice of God comes to him and tells him to get up and walk. And as long as he obeyed that voice, he'd be safe. So he just, when the voice said to stop, he stopped. When the voice said go this way, but it took hundreds of, a couple of years of prayer and suffering till he could stop hearing the voice of his own selfishness and hear the voice of God. Or there's this other book I read about this kid who, same kind of story, travels, is abducted as a child soldier and decides to escape in Africa. And all he did was pray. And he said, this voice led me. Now, I do believe the voice of God is always talking to us. That's one's consciousness. But the problem is there's competing voices of selfishness and insecurity. But we as Catholics believe in what's called the supremacy of one's conscience. That's actually in our documents. And it's so important that even Pope Benedict, he said, and I like this, he said, speaking of this, over the Pope and any ecclesial authority, there stands one's own consciousness, which must be obeyed before everything else, even if necessary, against the requirements of ecclesiastical authority. And he said, this establishes a principle in opposition to increasing totalitarianism. That it doesn't matter, even if a bishop or a priest tells you to do something, your consciousness will tell you whether that's right or wrong. Pope Francis has repeated that. St. Paul talks about that when he says, when they say, what about those people? St. Paul basically says they can hear the Holy Spirit speak. And then he talks about even some people who call themselves religious. He says all they listen to is their stomach. They don't really listen to to God. So we'd say the supremacy of one's conscience must be listened to. So you can never blame me and say, well, Father Len told me I have to hate Canadians. No, the problem with that is that if I was a parent and I'd tell my kids, we as Catholics believe in the supremacy of one's conscience, I'm just afraid children will say, oh, well, then emotionally, whatever I want trumps doctrine. Does consciousness trump doctrine? But that's why I'd say, like, on this chapter, make sure you tell your children, your feelings aren't necessarily part of your conscience. They are, because you have a feeling that, this person's dangerous. You want to listen to that feeling. But in the Catechism, it says that consciousness is a judgment of reason, quote unquote. And I like that. Your feelings inform your consciousness, but they don't dictate to it. And even the word conscience, it's con means with, science means knowledge. So with science, with knowledge, you make the right decision. With knowledge, you pay attention to the voice of God. So we have these moral laws and rules and regulations in the Catholic Church. So you want to pay attention to those moral laws. Or Chesterton said, and I like this, when you come upon a fence, before tearing the fence down, ask, why is there a fence there? Because like maybe on the other side of that fence, there's a big bull that's going to trample you down. Like if there's a moral law, you want to ask yourself why. You want to have the humility to ask, okay, the church teaches this, or the Bible teaches this, rather than just say, well, my conscience says no. No. Actually, sometimes it may be morally right to break a religious rule. And like in the Gospel of Luke, and I do love this, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is constantly breaking rules in the book of Leviticus. Not because he's against the book of Leviticus. He's against the misapplication of religious rules.
I have to agree. I think it's intent. Intent comes in there,
Right.
correct? So, for example, I've experienced children that sometimes like to be brutally truthful. But what is their intent, right? So they come up to another child and tell them something degrading to that child. Your shoes are ugly. But what's their intent? They will come back and say, well, I was just speaking the truth. But what was your intent when you spoke that truth? Was it to hurt someone? That intent overrides the truth.
Yeah. Right.
And with Jesus, his intent to teach us, to guide us, to direct us, to be more faithful, his intent overrode, I think, the law.
That's a great analogy that you can say, I'm just doing this for truth, but you're really doing it not because the Holy Spirit is telling your conscience to do that. You're doing it because you want to be mean.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this great concept. I don't know if parents can explain this to children, but I thought this was so insightful. There is a woman named Hannah Arendt. Have you ever read it?
I haven't.
Oh,
No.
she's amazing. So Jewish, World War II. She becomes a New York reporter. And then when Eichmann is captured, she wants to go to the trial and visit this monster who was responsible for millions of people dying. So she had this concept that when she walks in and sees Eichmann, that Eichmann would be, dressed in black and, the scar down the middle of his face with a monocle, petting a cat or something, this picture of evil.
Right.
And there's this white, button-down, collared ex-vacuum cleaner salesman. Prim and proper. Never cussed his entire life. Never broke a speeding ticket. Never broke any rule. And she comes up with this concept called the banality of evil. So I just love that. The banality of evil. That, wow, he was banal. Like, he was the most evil person in that generation, and yet he looked like a prim and proper person. And when questioned about killing millions and millions of people, he said his defense was, I was just only following the law. But he used the law to not examine his own conscience. It's like the little kid who says, I was just speaking the truth. I do love that, where it was so insightful that some people who say, I'm just following the law, that's a way of avoiding God. May have never cussed or, even ever got drunk or speeding ticket. Doesn't mean he's moral. What makes you moral is listening to the Holy Spirit speaking. And people have a way of killing their conscience so they don't feel guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And so Eichmann simply killed his conscience, but always maintained a prim and proper view. That's the banality of evil. I'm just following the rules.
He's deferring his responsibility, right?
Right.
And that's why I think it's so important that parents give their children an opportunity to be responsible so that they can practice utilizing their conscience, right? Oftentimes as parents, we may want to do everything for our children. And in that opportunity of doing everything for our children, we don't give them the opportunity to be responsible, maybe to take care of a pet, do a chore, but they need to have that on their conscience that I am responsible for this activity. If I don't do it, I need to be responsible and say I did not do it and apologize, right?
Holding them accountable.
So accountability, responsibility. And in Eichmann's case, he was not taking responsibility for his actions.
Yeah.
He
do
was
you think a parent
leaving it to
could
someone else.
teach their children the banality of evil? Even little kids, like, oh no, just saying that, oh no, I was just speaking the truth. That's a banality of evil. It looks like you're following your conscience.
I think, unfortunately, there are people that teach their children to be
Banal.
Yeah, I think there are. It was an interesting police show that I was watching one time, and it was a documentary, and there was this group of people that had decided to teach their families that it was fine whatever you did as long as you didn't do it to a member of the family.
Oh, sweet.
So, and we're talking, very evil things. And when these individuals were interviewed after they were arrested by the police, they came across in their interviews that they honestly believed that what they were doing to these other individuals was absolutely fine because those people were not part of their family. So do I think it's
Possible?
It's possible? Yeah, unfortunately I do.
Well, that gets us to the heart of the chapter is for parents to teach their kids that you can either strengthen or weaken your conscience. So the Catholic word will be inform your conscience, but I'm thinking if I was a parent, I wouldn't use the phrase personally, inform your conscience, because I like weak versus strong or awake versus asleep. You want a conscience that's powerful, but, to strengthen your conscience, what do you do? So the chapter kind of outlined, well, obviously prayer, like St. Patrick prayed and prayed and prayed. One practice I like that I really hope parents practice is the St. Ignatius examen.
I love that. We used to do it at my old school every Advent and Lent, right after lunch.
Oh.
We would turn the lights down, and over the PA system, we would walk through the Ignatian examen, and I think it's beautiful. Just
for the parents, I'm going to quickly explain what the examen is. And it's a daily practice. St. Ignatius pushed. I do it the Dorothy Day way. So 1, you start with the opening prayer. 2, name 3 things that day you're grateful for, that happened that day. And then I always say a glory be for each. And they've done studies. You practice this, you actually end up happier. You notice more things to be happy over long term. 3, name 3 things that you could have done better. No, sorry, not 3 things. 2 things you could have done better. And then just say an act of contrition for each. I never have a problem thinking of that. But the odd part is, if you want to develop a conscience, you want to develop your kid's sense of guilt. I could have been better. Now, this is a big issue with me. Do not shame your children. Just because you messed up doesn't mean that you're a piece of trash. The fact that you messed up means, no, we can become stronger at loving. When you feel guilt, that means, I can do better. You got to be thankful for guilt.
Yeah, we need to reflect. We need to reflect on our life. All of us can do better. None of us are divine. So there's obviously lots of things that we can do better.
Improve. So 4th step is, where was a fingerprint of God in your day? And the 5th step, there's 5 steps, is hope for tomorrow. Things are going to get even better and better. And why I like it is I like to examine both the gratitude and what things could I have done better. If I'm going to learn what is this voice that God is speaking to me, I have to separate the times I listened to the voice that made me be less loving, less kind, I want to get good at recognizing the voice of the flesh, as I'll call it, the voice of ego, and versus the voice of God in me. So I'd say prayer and self-examination is step 1. Step 2 is, and this is the informed part, teachings. We have the 10 Commandments. We teach kids the 10 Commandments just as a basics of morality. And then Christ taught the Beatitudes, which is a little bit harder. Blessed are the poor in spirit. I don't need money to make me happy. And then we have all these Catholic teachings to inform. I would say, parents, you want to inform them with how to apply all that. The reason why Christ doesn't give a lot of hard, fast rules is because 10 Commandments work great for letting you know when you went way over the edge. But it doesn't teach you how to really listen to God. The Beatitudes and parables, that's learning how to listen to God and think for yourself.
I think you touched on some great points there. One of the things I think it's really important for parents to work with their children. You were talking about joy and happiness in finding, looking at the positive things that happen in your day and the reflection of what could I have done better. And teenagers tend to get caught up in the what could I have done better and overemphasizing the guilt. They need to see the positive as well sometimes. But one of the 10 commandments that I think is so important to explain to our children and point out to them that there is an issue with joy when you break this commandment is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Especially children get caught up in little Joey has a PS5 and I wish I had one. And not just that I wish I had one, but I begrudge him that he's got it and I don't. And they really hang up on those things and they don't even realize that they're breaking a commandment that.
The grudge is poisoning their...
It is poisoning their lives.
The funny part is that just reminds me of this saint that said, and I think this is true, without a good conscience, you can never be joyful. And like a good conscience would be able to say, I don't need to be envious. I don't need to begrudge somebody that they have. I can rejoice the fact that I'm happy you have it. But I think the saint is right. Without a good conscience, you will never be happy. So, that's the teaching part. But this also gets in the third part that this is in the book, but this is what I like. I would say the third thing to develop a conscience is, I'll call it advice. That you got to seek out people's advice. And so in the Catholic tradition, that's called a spiritual director, right? Or in the Irish, we're both Irish.
Yep.
Irish tradition, the ancient Celts had what's called an Anam Cara, which is Gaelic for soul friend, that everybody should pray to receive a soul friend. And a soul friend is the person you would share your deepest secrets with. And your Anam Cara would make a pledge before God never to share your secrets. But your Anam Cara would always be like the sounding board to give advice. Now, for our kids, I'm not saying kids need to get a social director or spiritual director. Parents are their children's spiritual director. You are their Anam Cara. Not their best friend, not their buddy. You're their soul friend at this time period. I think it's parents who've got to be giving advice to your kids. It's just, you have to be clever on how you do it. Like, did you see the movie, The Little Mermaid?
Yes.
See, if I was a parent, I know it's a cute, entertaining movie, but I was kind of horrified by it. I really was. I was horrified. Like, okay, if I had a little girl...
She ran away?
And she ran away. She tried to be something she wasn't, all for a guy, and she's willing to lose her freedom and her voice just to make this relationship work. Like, it's a cute story, but if I was a parent, I'd be like, oh, we'll be dissecting that one. Yeah. I wouldn't.
Lots of Disney films you need to take a look at.
You're their spiritual director. You want to develop their consciousness. Don't let them think, oh, that was just a cute movie. Or if I had a teenagers, they don't do well with one-on-one confrontation. But this one drives me up a wall because I've had some teenagers say this, where they said, well, more wars have been fought due to religion than anything else. I hate that because that is a lie.
It's not true.
They've done several historical studies, and yes, 3% of all wars existed because of religion. But 3% is not a lot. So that's actually not true. And religion helped prevent far more wars. So 97% of all wars would have happened. If I was a parent, I would not just be giving advice, but when my kids said something like that, you might not know the answer, but I do. Call me, call Wes, and say, hey, what's Father Len's rebuttal to that? If I was a parent, I would be pointing out the lack of conscience in our society. Because I was that the grocery store, and some woman was talking on the cell phone with a speaker. And this sounds kind of strange. I was held captive to that entire conversation on the speaker. And I remember there's kids around, and it's not just the lack of awareness, it's a lack of consciousness that that person's moral compass didn't ever think, well, other people are around. Or I was working out on the elliptical at the gym once, and there's two women on each side of me, and they were yelling back and forth about this gossip about this other woman. And like, I'm trying to get in my zone, and I was just stunned. Two mothers, young women. So finally I stopped and I says, do you guys know I'm standing in between you. You can move over to the other machine. And they were insulted that I stopped and asked them to move over because I don't want to hear this. But if I was a parent, I'd be pointing out, now that's a lack of consciousness. That's just not lack of awareness or being impolite. Like, those things are, how come you couldn't feel that that was wrong?
They discounted you as a human being.
Yeah.
They saw you as a piece of furniture that was in their way.
And I wouldn't do it to be judgmental towards other people, because I don't want my kids, I wouldn't want my kids to be judgmental. But even like putting away your shopping cart at Costco, they did a study. You don't put away your shopping cart. People who don't put away their shopping cart test out to be more likely to be narcissists or sociopaths. And so, are you going to marry somebody if they don't put away their shopping cart? That's a little red flag. And if I was a parent, I'd say, I don't want you to be judgmental towards them, but I want you to be aware that, wow, if you had a good conscience, you would be aware that something's wrong here. You're their spiritual director. You're the ones who have to inform that, oh, wait, did you know? Like, I remember once, one of my friends met my dad saw my dad at a tennis court. And so my dad went over and said, oh, how are you doing? How are you doing? And he was the mopey teenager. And later my dad said something to me, and I still like my friend. He says, that was wrong. He didn't look me in the eye. He didn't acknowledge my presence. He was more concerned about his own insecurity. And I remember thinking, have I ever done that? I'm sure I have. If I was a parent, I'd be pointing out not just the church's teaching, but I'd use real life examples that's constantly around. Even if it's like The Little Mermaid. So I know that sounds kind of strange. Yeah. Prayer, examination, teachings of the church. Sometimes, like, the odd part is Pope Benedict is right. Sometimes to do the moral thing, you might have to break church law. I wouldn't tell a child that, but that the banality of evil. But I'd also be aware of what weakens one's conscience. If I was a parent, you're going to say, oh no, we're going to teach you how to strengthen, get a muscular, tough conscience. But also, what degrades your conscience? What weakens your conscience? And I know this sounds kind of strange. For me, one is distraction. Did you ever see Star Wars where when they're going to fly in and bomb the Death Star, a guy says, all right, stay on target, stay on target, stay on target. And I know this sounds kind of strange, but I think a lot of people are they lose their conscience because they've gone off target.
Right.
And they get distracted with all the concerns of the world.
I like how you brought in parents watching films with them. Children, students are distracted. They get off target because of social media, the things that they see in films, TVs, books. And I think it's important for parents to read those books, watch those movies with their children so that they can have those discussions. Yeah. Harry Potter is a big one. It was when it first came out, my nieces and nephews had to have, each book as they came out. I was taking them to, the bookstore at midnight to stand in line and get the next book. But I needed to read all those books.
Me too.
So that I could make sure, one, that we had the discussions. In every single Harry Potter book, if he had gone to an adult and told them what was going on, the story would have ended there. So I made sure when I talked to my son, when I talked to the children, and we talk about Harry Potter, we stop and pause and say, if Harry had gone to the headmaster and told him what was going on, these people wouldn't have perished. This wouldn't have happened. Now, we wouldn't have had a great book. That's true. Books depend on those situations where they haven't done the right thing and then they need to make up for it. But I think it's important that we point out so that our children realize that we shouldn't be the Harry Potter. We should go ask for help, whether it's a spiritual advisor, whether it's a parent, whether it's a teacher. When there's something that's going wrong and you see it, you need to talk about it. You need to get support. You need to get help to get it resolved.
Well, that reminds me of the second thing I want to say that weakens one's conscience. And that is, in the Harry Potter book, there's a great line that most people, I'm sure, just didn't listen. That Harry has this afterlife experience and then comes back and talks to evil Voldemort, whose soul is split apart, and says to Voldemort, I've seen your future. I know the state of your soul. I'm paraphrasing. And he says, your only way out is to feel regret. But the last thing, like feeling regret, Voldemort thinks is a weakness. Feeling regret is a great power. And I just think if I was a parent, I would never shame, but let your kids feel regret. Don't save them from like, oh no, I want you to be happy. I want you to be happy by actually becoming more loving. Similar to that is a lot of people, I think, well, later I'll develop a consciousness. You don't say, well, I'm going to eat cookies all day long and then later work on my health. It's a lifelong process. Another one is, and this is in the Bible, and I really like this, in the Adam and Eve story, the first thing that ruins our consciousness is they redefine goodness. So when they look at the fruit of the tree of good and evil, it says that they saw the fruit as good. And what that means is this: they're redefining the definition of good to suit themselves. So they want to redefine goodness, not in connection to God, but what will give them the greatest advantage. And I find human beings do that all the time to justify, but it kills their conscience. Just to say, well, I'm going to define what's good for me. And so over like 100 times in the Bible, that phrase, it was good in their eyes, will keep coming up over and over again. Every time some king or person does something horrible, it uses that little phrase. And you think, it's the Adam and Eve story. Humanity's one of our first things to do is redefine things as good. Not according to what's God, but what works for me. Does that make any sense?
It does. And what's easier, right? So sometimes we choose the easier path because we've redefined what good is. And sometimes the real goodness is in that harder journey, that struggle, where we're going to learn and move forward in life. This is a strange connection, and I don't know if you'll get it, but we were having a conversation about Hitler. And if you could go back in time, would you kill baby Hitler?
No.
Right? No, you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you?
Well, that comes to free will, but
so that's tied into conscious, right? So you have to think, well, if I did that, I would stop the Holocaust. I might stop all of this other going on. However, wouldn't it be possibly a better choice to educate baby Hitler so that he never made the choices that he went, because we're taking away his free will, right?
Right.
And we're not allowed to do that either.
No.
So an easy track is say, we'll just get rid of this, right? But
destroy it.
But the harder track would be attempting
to educate.
Right?
Part of that is, I think, what destroys one's consciousness too is listening to the wrong voice. So if I was a parent, I'd be always asking, is this the voice of selfishness or is this the voice of God that you're listening to? And the problem is, and I that's why I'm scared to be if I was a parent. My feeling is, I could be wrong, but once your kids turn 13, things start to change. That's what I noticed. And I say that from personal experience because one person in my family. This person is not a very kind person, we'll put it that way. And once as a family, we were talking like, where did we go wrong? When did that happen? And we all agreed that it was high school, that she started to hang out with the pretty girls and the selfish girls, and she was never challenged on it. And so starting with a teenager, her friends became more important than her parents. And what they thought became more, and she was never challenged. And then as, now she's a 60-some-year-old woman who only thinks of herself. And it's a really sad story. But
it's a lonely story.
It's a lonely, and she never will be happy. But hopefully she will be. But like, if I was a parent, I'd realize, oh, this is when this is the battleground. Like, who your kids choose to be friends with informs their conscience. You know what I mean?
I agree. I have a 14-year-old. I agree 100%.
And like I had this woman I know is a teacher, but she's Irish and she's bold. Went in for a parent-teacher conference, and she kind of broke professionalism, which I know is not right. But the parents started to complain about the behavior of the teenager. So this teacher slips out and says, yeah, because he's hanging around potheads and druggies. And the parents said, well, you can't choose your kids' friends. She says, oh, yeah, you can. Yeah. You tell them you're not hanging around those druggies anymore. And she says, well, I can't really tell my kid that. Yes, you can. You're going to ruin their moral compass. So I know this sounds kind of strange. If I was a parent, I'd be concerned about weakening them. And this sounds kind of strange. We're talking about consciousness, but in the chapter, it came up with this talk about free will. And I love the fact that you want to put free will in terms of freedom, that either you're gaining freedom or you're losing your freedom. And freedom does not mean I get to do what I want. That's what the world is going to tell you. Freedom means I have the power to do, I am free to do what's good. And that sounds kind of strange, but define losing their freedom. Like if I become an alcoholic, or if I, with me, become addicted to my anger or selfishness, that's losing my freedom. Choosing sin is a type of slavery where you're no longer really free. You're controlled by greed and anger or alcohol. So you're not really any free. You've lost your freedom. That's what sin does. You're no longer free to do the good. So free will means gaining the freedom. And I use this analogy, and so parents can still, but like when I was a little kid, I was heavily through elementary school to high school into swim team. We were practicing an hour before school, an hour after school. And it's a lot of work. And I loved it. Tons of hard work. But now I'm free that if I go to the ocean, I can swim in the ocean. And somebody else who says, well, I'm free to do whatever I want. And what I want to do is watch TV. And they never learned how to swim. Then they're not free to really enjoy the beach. I went to Hawaii once with some friends, and one of them wasn't ever a good swimmer, so he couldn't, I think it's Hunama Bay, go snorkeling and see incredible beauty of the fish. And I was like, why didn't you ever learn how to swim? There's so much to the world. Same thing with free will. With free will, you have free will, but you have to develop your free will. It takes a lot of effort to become free. It takes a lot of effort to develop one's consciousness. But with free will and consciousness, it's like swimming. You become free to do whatever you want. So consciousness is not just, it'd be easy to say, just listen to the voice of God. But it takes a lot of work to listen to the voice of God. So you're free to choose goodness and happiness and not be controlled by all this other stuff. So that's what the chapter was about. So that's kind of me, but
no, I agree.
You're a parent. You're an expert on this.
I'm not an expert. I think the only expert we have on parenting is God. And as you said, he's talking to us all the time, but are we listening? There's a beautiful song that was written about that God is speaking to us all the time. But is anybody listening? And that's what we need to use prayer to develop our ability to hear what God's trying to tell us. And we need to, as parents, we're responsible to help our children develop that ability.
I do love that. That's because I love the psalm that day after day after day, God is always sending us a message. It's whether we really are paying attention.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us. And thank you as well. And God bless. We'll see you for the next chapter.
It wasn't as painful as I thought.
Did you think that was it? Was that okay, Tim?